Welcome back to the daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. We are beginning a new section today. We are beginning section 51 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and we will be covering the laws of the bracha that one makes after eating food. Not just the big benching that we say after having bread, typically on a Friday night or any time that we eat bread, but also anytime you eat, there's an after blessing that can be made. So let's take a look. We'll be talking about the different measurements and if the food is in its natural form, which different foods can combine. Okay, you know what? Let's get started and we'll see where we go. So after eating the fruit of any tree, which is not of the 7 species, I'll speak about that soon, or of any fruit of the ground, meaning or any vegetable, or any food that was not grown in the soil, you should say the concluding bracha, Boy nefashos rabois. So it's a rather small blessing. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, Elokeinu melech ha'olam, our God, King of the world. Boy nefashos rabois, who creates many souls, the chesreinan and the lackings, al kol mashe barasa, of all that you created, lahachyus b'hem nefesh kol chai, to sustain the soul of every living thing. Baruch ha'olam, blessed is he who gives life. So I didn't actually look it up in the Siddur, and I realized it's time for me to polish up on exactly what that after blessing means. But this is a rather small after blessing, which is said anytime you eat any food that is not of the 7 species, that is not bread, you will say the after bracha of Bar Nefashos Rabbos. So that would be an apple, fruits, vegetables, drinks, other than wine. So you always say that short after blessing. Now, when we spoke about the bracha one makes before eating, we said that there's no minimum amount a person needs to eat to make a bracha. Even if you're eating just 1 crumb of bread and you're swallowing that 1 crumb, you would need to say, Haboitzi lechem min haaretz. However, when it comes to the bracha that one recites after eating, there is a minimum amount that a person needs to eat in order to be able to make an after blessing. And what is that minimum amount? It's a kazayis. Kazayis literally means like an olive, but practically speaking today, it's a lot more than just the size of an olive. We'll discuss what that quantity is in a moment. But if you're eating less than this quantity, then there is no need to say an after bracha at all. Now we'll see soon that there are exceptions to this rule, but this is the general principle. According to some authorities, you need not say the concluding bracha after drinking liquids unless you drink a revius. A revius, different opinions. Some say it's a little over 100 ml. The very much accepted opinion is that it's 86 ml, meaning many communities go by that, 86 ml. It's not that much at all, but it's more than a sip. Other authorities would say that even after drinking a kazayis, so a kazayis is about up to or as little as 17 grams or 14 grams even, which is quite a small amount. So even if you drink just even as little as about 17 grams, you would already need to say that, I should say 17 mil, because you're talking about liquids, then you would need to say it after bracha. So here's an interesting phenomenon. Therefore, in order to avoid any doubt, be careful to drink either less than a kazayis or at least a revius, whether you're drinking whiskey or other beverages, because there is also discussion if by whiskey there's a smaller amount. Okay, before we continue, let's discuss what this all means in very practical terms. So as far as food is concerned, if you're having a piece of chocolate, just a little piece of chocolate, you'll make a bracha before you eat the chocolate, but there's no bracha to be made after eating the chocolate, because it's less than a kazayis. how much is a kazayas? So there are many different opinions about this. It's not really a weight. Doesn't go by weight. It really goes by volume. The question is, how do you determine volume if not by weight? Well, I'll say more specifically. It really goes by size, but that size is determined once the food is condensed. So then the question is, how much should the food be condensed before you measure the size of the food? So this is all a subject of heavy debate amongst the different halachic authorities. And I'm going to just go now with the authority of Rabbi Avram Chaim Da, who's quite a big leading authority that lived the end of his life, at least, or a lot of his life in Jerusalem, in the passed away probably the 60s or 70s. And he says like this. He says that to make it simpler for people to know the measurements, what he's done is he's condensed different foods and then he's put them on the scale. And once you condense different foods, then there won't be much of a difference of weight once it's condensed between one food and another. So therefore, he says he gives it approximate weight. It's an interesting phenomena. You know, you'd say that a chocolate weighs much more than cake. But once you condense, if you squash the cake, then if you squash it enough, then eventually, if it's solid, the cake and the chocolate will weigh pretty much the same thing. Now, others argue with him and they say that no, you're not supposed to be squashing it so much, but he says you do squash it a lot. This is, again, up for heavy debate, really heavy debate. But the bottom line is like this. According to Rab Chaim Da, if you take whatever food you're eating and you put it on a scale, you have a little kitchen scale and you put it on the scale, and the food that you're eating weighs less than 17 grams, maybe even 14, but I'll go with 17 grams, then that's definitely less than a kazayas and no after bracha is required at all. So if you're having a piece of chocolate, that's definitely less than 17 grams. Nowadays, it's a lot easier to figure this out because anything that you buy actually says on the outside how many grams it is. Even if, so like, for example, let's say you're eating a slab of chocolates, and the slab of chocolates, so on the bottom of the slab over here, I see it says the slab is 100 grams. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. So in a second, I know that if I'm going to eat 2 rows, I'm eating a third. So that means I'm eating 33 grams. If I'm eating 1 row, then that's about 16 grams. If I'm eating 2 pieces, it's about 8 grams. So if you have a little bit of, if you just exercise your mathematics a little bit, then pretty much nowadays it's very easy to determine the how much any food weighs without a scale as long as it's purchased. If you're making it at home, then if you buy a little cheap scale, you could play around for a few days, and once you've done that, you'll develop a bit of an idea. But the idea is that if you're eating a few small pieces, then no after bracha is required. Once you're eating more than that, then it becomes questionable. Between 14 or between 17 grams and 24 or 27 grams, so again, between 17 grams and 27 grams, it's questionable if it is a kazayas or if it's not a kazayas. And therefore, you shouldn't eat in that gray zone because you're actually not sure if you should or shouldn't be making it after bracha. So practically, that causes a bit of an issue if you have like those little packed chocolates, those mini chocolates. If you look on the wrapper, those chocolates are about 20 grams. So if you're going to eat 1 chocolate, then it's actually questionable whether you do or don't need to make it after bracha. So the simple solution is to eat 2, but maybe I could get into trouble for that. But an alternative solution is to also eat something else or to drink a cup of water if you're thirsty, because different foods can combine together. For those that have just joined, what we've said so far is that there's a special bracha that one makes after eating food, but there's a minimum amount a person needs to eat in order to be able to make that after bracha. And that minimum amount that you need to eat is between 14 and 27 grams, which means if you're eating less than 14 grams, then no after bracha is required. You can't make it after bracha. If you're eating more than 27 grams, then you must make it after bracha. And if you're eating between 14 and 27 grams, then eat more. Okay. So if you're having just like, a slice of cucumber or 2 slices of cucumber, 3 slices of cucumber, you don't make any after bracha at all. But once you're eating more than that, then you want to know that you're having over 27 grams, which is definitely a kazayis, according to Reb Chaim, and then you would be able to make it after bracha. The same would even go for a piece of bread and benching. If you're going to wash your hands and say hamotzi, and just have, a little tiny slice of bread, that's definitely less than a kazayis, it's definitely less than 14 or 17 grams, then you don't bench at all. If it's more than 27 grams, which again, if you're buying a loaf of bread, you could actually, it will say how much the loaf weighs, and then you could quickly see how many slices there are, and you'll know exactly how many grams each. Or if you buy a box of matzah, it will say on the outside how many grams are in the box, and then you see how many pieces. Or more specifically, if you look at the details, where it mentions a breakdown, so it will tell you per serving, and it'll tell you how many grams a serving is, it'll tell you how many pieces it is. So you can figure it all out. But the bottom line is that whenever you are making it after blessing, or whenever you eat, either eat very little, or eat enough, either eat less than 14 grams, or eat more than 27 grams, so that you can definitely make it after bracha. That's the general rule. Looking at halacha number 2. Okay. The after bracha as well as birkas hamazon should not be said unless you have eaten. We just did that. Halacha number 3. Oh, and one final point which I didn't discuss outside is that when it comes to drinking, there's another measurement. Some say that if you drink less than, according to Reb Chaim, less than 86 mil, then no after bracha is required. Others say that if you drink less than a kazayis, no after bracha is required. So what this means, practically speaking, is if you make kiddush, or havdalah, and the cup of kiddush or havdalah that you're making has exactly your revius, has exactly 86 mil, then you need to drink the whole cup. Why? Because if you're going to drink less than a kazayis, less than as little as 17 mil, then you actually don't get the mitzvah. And if you're going to drink more than that, as long as you're drinking less than 86 mil, then there's a question whether an after bracha needs to be recited. And you don't want to possibly be required in an after blessing and not. But the average becha is much more than 86 mil. So the regular becha, if you drink a majority of the becha, you have definitely drinking a revius, and you would go ahead and make the special after blessing, which is made after havdalah or kiddush. Anyhow, the same ideas that we've spoken about for food apply to drinks as well, except there's more gray area when it comes to drinks. So again, either have just a little sip, or if you're having more than that, have it together with a glass of water if you're thirsty or whatever it is, so that you know that you've had enough, you're not in a gray zone, so you could make it after bracha. Next halacha. Some authorities maintain that after eating a whole thing which grew naturally, such as a nut or some other fruit, even one single bean, even if its quantity is less than a kazayis, since it's a whole fruit, it needs an after bracha. Others disagree. Therefore, to avoid any doubt, you should not eat less than a kazayis. If the article was divided before it was eaten, it loses its special importance, and all authorities agree that you should not say the after bracha at all. So this is very practical. Might be a little bit of a tough one. A cherry tomato. Okay, a cherry tomato is really small, but according to some authorities, since a cherry tomato is a whole entity, so even though it's less than a kazayit, it's definitely less than 17 grams, but it's its own entity, so maybe it does require its own after bracha. Others say, no, it doesn't make a difference if the tomato is its own entity. It's still less than a kazayas. If it's less than at least 17 grams, then definitely no after bracha is required. So to avoid this doubt again, if you're eating cherry tomatoes, you want to eat enough vegetables, meaning you want to eat a total of over about 27 grams of vegetables so that you will be able to make it after blessing. If you want to have just one cherry tomato in isolation and you're not eating anything else, then what you would need to do is you would need to slice it. And if you just cut off the tip, then you have less, you're not eating a whole entity, then it definitely doesn't require an after bracha. The same would even go for a grape. If you're eating one grape, there's a question, do you need to make it after bracha? Not. On the one hand, it's a whole entity. On the other hand, it's less than a kazayas. So again, you can't eat one grape. If you're eating a grape in isolation, unless you're eating other foods that will combine, as we'll learn soon. But if you're eating one grape, then eat a couple more so that you know that you can make the special after blessing that's made in grapes. Almonds, nuts, any whole fruit or vegetable that's super small, this halacha would apply to. Okay, halacha number 4. We now talk about what can combine. So you're eating different foods. Let's see. All articles of food combine to make up a kazayas. So if you ate half a kazayas of something that requires the after bracha bar the pashas rabbis, and then you ate another half a kazayas of a food after which the 3-faceted after bracha is said. So for example, you had a piece of cake, a small piece of cake. Now the after blessing on a piece of cake is be'ed shalish or alamichya. In the siddur, you'll see if you're eating something from the 7 species, and there's a special after blessing. It's like maybe double or triple as long as bar nefashis is the short one. So you're eating a piece of cake, and you're also having a chocolate. So the one food would require a basic after blessing of bar nefashis rabbis, while the other food would require a more advanced or more special after blessing of al hamichya. So what you would do is, since you didn't have a full kazayas of the higher level foods, then it would combine with the lower level food, and you would just say a bar nefashis rabbis. If you're having a little piece of cake and a chocolate, and the two together combined to a kazayas, then you would just say the after blessing of bar nefashis rabbis. And the Kitzur continues that it seems to be that the same really applies if you ate half a kazayas of fruit, after which the bracha ala eitz is said, together with half a kazayas of food, after which the bracha ala michya is said. Or you ate half a kazayas of bread, even though in this case there's no food which requires, as it's after bracha, the recitation of bar nefashis rabbis. Nevertheless, you should say bar nefashis rabbis as the after bracha. So he says, as long as, even if you're eating one food that requires one after blessing and another food that requires another after blessing, and neither the two after blessings is bar nefashis rabbis, since each of the foods in their own right would not merit their own after blessing, but you did eat in total a kazayas, then you would be able to say bar nefashis rabbis. If you ate half a kazayas of food after which the after bracha is alamichya is said, together with half the kazayas of bread, again, so you ate half a kazayas of habatzi bread and half a kazayas of the zaydas bread. So then you would just make the bracha alamichya on the zaydas bread, because basically when you have two foods and one's on the higher tier than the other, but the higher tier doesn't in its own right have enough for an after blessing, then it kind of joins up with the food on the lower tier, and you would make the after blessing on the two foods together. Food and drink do not combine for the minimum quantities. So if you drank half a kazayas and you ate half the kazayas, then you would make no after blessing, because the two don't combine. I see I've gone over time, but thanks so much for joining.